So, welcome back to our next episode of New Narratives. And today we have with us Ariel Figueroa and Mallory Combemale. And they are many things, both to each other and in general. And so I'm excited to introduce these two wonderful beings who also happen to be dear friends of mine. Mallory, Ariel and Mallory joined Katya Stepanov on the founding team of Inheritance Project. And the Inheritance Project trains leaders, resolves conflicts, and builds inclusive, resilient communities by unpacking and transforming our individual and collective inheritance. And they work with evolutionary humans and organizations who are shaping a more equitable, regenerative world with social good at its core. And Mallory and Ariel had not met before co founding and working on this business together. And in February of 2021, they made the leap from co founders to life partners and have since been navigating the joys and the challenges of an intense and multifaceted partnership where there is nowhere to hide. The complex dynamics of working and living together has served as an accelerator to their relationship, as well as their individual personal growth. The unique nature of their relationship has invited them to create more intentionally in the way they structure their relationship, as well as relate and handle conflicts. And we'll be talking more about conflict resolution in this episode as well, because I know they're going to be teaching an amazing course on this. But a little bit about each of them. Ariel Figueroa is a native New Yorker of Puerto Rican and Jewish descent. Ariel is guided by an inquiry into the architecture of identity and transformation. And after 6 years as a teacher in public and private schools, Ariel began integrating his training in education with yoga, meditation, and other healing arts, and created a company which designs nature-based retreats and programming for individual and team development. As the Chief Experience Officer of Inheritance Project, his mission is to create transformational spaces for learning, healing, and growth by integrating self-discovery with embodiment practices. And Mallory Combemale, a Singaporean French-American citizen raised in London, Mallory has always been fascinated with identity and facilitating cross-cultural understanding. In her 10 plus years of consulting and facilitation experience, she has worked with Fortune 100 C-suite execs, nonprofits, city government agencies, universities, and startup founders. As a co-founder of the Inheritance Project, she leads conflict mediation programs and transformational experiences for teams to build trust, understanding, and inclusive ways of collaborating. We did it. That is our introduction of these two incredible human beings. And today we are going to turn the lens and ask you a lot about your inherited ideals about relationship and partnership and what you're discovering. And so I think I'd love to just start with this question of what is alive now in each of your hearts, and if you want to talk to the heart of that third space of the bond that you are co-creating, I'm interested in that as well. But what is on your heart now? What are the questions that you are each sitting with and intentions that you are practicing with as it pertains to your relationship? So whoever feels moved to answer first.
Yeah, that's a great question. I loved all your questions. Did you wanna jump in first, or would you like me to?
Go ahead.
Well, it's a big question. I think that right now, I'm I'm actually working with a coach right now. I'm working with a somatic coach. So that's someone who does coaching work, but with this lens of how's everything actually physically being moving and being expressed in the body. And it's led to some really deep work around childhood wounding, like childhood imprinting. Um, you know, understanding what my core wounds are and how they're now expressing themselves in in my relationships, primarily with my relationship to myself, how they're expressing themselves in my relationship with Mallory, and how they're expressing themselves in my relationship to my work. And those are kind of like the three main areas that I'm focused on. And yeah, and that's been bringing up some really deep stuff around trust and and understanding. I think right now a question I'm sitting with a lot is when I come up against resistance, or when I come up against um, the various things that I perceive as holding me back. Where do first of all, like, where is these sensations in the body? How are they filtering up to my emotional state? And then what are the stories that I'm creating about them? And so going into this work has been really revealing about, you know, places that I get stuck in my work, places that I get stuck in relationship. And the question that my coach asked me, which I'm sitting with a lot these days, is, yeah, what's being protected? What are you protecting when that armor comes on? And what is the need underneath? So it's a very big and deep question, and so we just went right to the heart of it. Yeah, what am I protecting? And then maybe on the other side of this very deep kind of like deep dive, this other question, which is like, what if it was easy? She was like, well, what if it was easy? Like, and I'm like, that's a great question too, because I think that it's really easy, especially someone who's like very spiritual oriented and very much has been a healer for a long time. You just kind of get like pulled into this like vortex of healing, and everything's about healing. It's like, what if it was easy? And that's been a really beautiful question, because the answer has been like, actually, yeah, this some of this could be a lot easier than perhaps you're making it. So that's a little bit about what's been alive for me these days. How about you?
It's funny, I just got back from a couple days of volunteering at a retreat center, cooking food in the kitchen, and one of the participants actually reminded me of something similar at our closing lunch. She said, you don't need to be so serious about your whole healing journey. What you remember, you're perfect exactly as you are right now. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a perspective that I haven't been tapped into for a long time, because I think similarly, I've been on this path of practicing yoga, meditation for 12 years, self development, really working on different aspects, healing in different ways. And it's very easy to become really focused on that and always looking to the next thing to fix about yourself. So, one of the things I've become aware of recently is how much I have a part of me that's like the fixer, that needs everything to be adjusted or thinks that there's something within me that I could improve or do better. And so, that invitation to just allow the perfection of what is, even if it's not how my mind wants it to be or what my ego thinks is good or right. I mean, even I was just sharing to Alexandra before we started recording this that I actually have a stomach ache and I feel really low energy today and a little bit of sadness. And a part of me really didn't want to be showing up to this conversation with all of those things present. And so this reminder actually of like, well, what if it's perfect just as it is? What if it's perfect just as you are, even if it's not 100% feeling good, high vibration, all the things that we want to cultivate all the time, because that's maybe will be disconnecting you also from really important parts of life and the depth and breadth of the human experience.
I love what both of you are sharing about this kind of discovery or question around ease and not needing to like push through or have it be perfect or have it be, it's almost like I'm hearing this through line of like non-resistance in some way. Like there's not a resistance to things as they are, but there's like a workability or some way that this could just be more simple. And Ariel, you were talking about this notion of trust as like a big theme that you're working with in both work and relationally. And I'm curious about the relationship between trust and ease and like trust um and so if you can, yeah, talk any more a little bit about that discovery, and then I'm going to plant another seed about a question, which is kind of this um, inheriting this idea that in order to evolve or grow or change states or change reality, have things shift in a direction that we are aspiring to, that it somehow has to be like really hard, like it has to take a lot. And so I'm hearing that as well, that this is something that you're both like, oh, maybe this actually doesn't have to look like that. And so, what instead are you discovering?
Mm. Something that Another thing that's related to some of the work I'm doing right now is was part of this invitation was to start looking at things without putting value judgments on them, and actually saying like, can you be curious about what's happening? And I think this is a really powerful invitation for me. I think I'm a very analytical person, and really always wanting to find answers and see like and categorize things so I can understand them, I can know how to relate to them appropriately, as we all do to a certain degree. And one of the invitations from this work I'm doing was yeah, be curious, and like can it be easy? And I think that was very new for me. Um and and I think like inviting in, like asking like, could this be easy, um was was a very new invitation, and one that it's something I'm holding with curiosity. Um, in terms of trust and the relationship with trust and ease, I mean, I think that the more we can invite trust in, the more ease we have. Like the more that we trust, the more open our energetic field is. Um, the less friction we have against our surroundings and the things that we're encountering. Um, and it still asks the question, well, how do you create trust? And that's a big question. It's different for a lot of people, and maybe another question to explore today. But yeah, I think the more that we can invite in trust, the more easeful things can be, including things that are difficult, including things that we actually just need to sit with or can't avoid. Um, the emotional state of somebody else that we can't have control over. Preview for further questions. um, yeah.
Well, I would actually like to add something about trust, if that's okay, because I often hear this in spiritual circles or Instagram accounts, just trust more. And I mean, I'm kind of already in my tone of voice, sort of making light of it, but there's a wisdom to it. And also, I think trust has to be built from a foundation of safety. And a lot of my understanding of this has come from my study of trauma informed approaches to healing and to teaching yoga. I have a practice now where I work one on one with people to support them to integrate breath work and meditation into their daily life as part of their routine. And I've worked with a lot of people who have pretty severe childhood abuse experiences. And if you're coming from that or even, less extreme backgrounds, it may not actually make sense to just trust everyone. There may be a lot of really good reasons why your body and your nervous system is saying, actually, no, I don't feel safe. No, it's not, this isn't a person I should trust. And sometimes, of course, when we've been through that kind of pain, it's very easy for our bodies and our hearts to close off to all people, even when it genuinely is safe. And we have to retrain our nervous system and retrain our body to know, what is safe, when it is appropriate to trust. And so that's always a constant investigation, I think, of when am I reacting to this situation based on my past experiences and hurts versus when am I really having genuine intuition in the moment that actually this isn't safe and I need to not trust this or not be here or not be in relationship with this person. And that's also really important to know, to listen to those signals from within and have boundaries. And all of those things. So I'm like, yes, trust with discernment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. And as we're talking about this relationship to trust and the discernment, like there's almost this inherent quality of vulnerability that's kind of involved, because if as our discernment is sharpening and getting refined, we're bound to expose ourselves to situations and energy and circumstances that might cause pain and might be difficult. And so I'm curious about just even the micro ways within your own bond, your own relationship. What are some ways that you have learned to build trust with each other, and like what has that looked like? And I think when we say trust, it's like trust in what? What does it actually mean to you?
Mm.
Mm.
So to kind of start there, I also work with people in one-on-one and in groups doing healing work, and right now that's taking the form of doing some guided psychedelic journeys with some clients. And um, when I talk about trust with people, I often say, a lot of people are coming into that, not only not trusting other people, but also not trusting themselves, because we have this long track record and history of going against our own better judgment, and it's hard to even trust ourselves. So what I often say is, you don't need to trust yourself, but trust that there's a part of you, trust that there's somewhere inside of you that is moving forward with the right intention. That you can trust that intention. Um, and I think that that allows me and some people to move forward in a process, to create a small opening. I think it's interesting you mentioned that, because this conversation about trust, because I think for a lot of our relationship, in our work relationship, was a lot of trust that was broken. Um, and and there's been and I think, you know, there was a lot of times when either one of us could have said, you know what, I don't trust, and I'm actually going to like remove myself from this situation, business and romantic. Um, but I think that there was a recognition of this intention underneath, that I trust that I'm moving in the right direction. And so I think with building trust, I think part of that from like a practical standpoint is sometimes creating small opportunities where trust, where something can be asked and something can be met in an intentional way that builds that little by little, and that can be um, things around communication. Can you let me know when you're going to be doing these things? And like creating the opportunities to like build trust intentionally, as opposed to thinking about it as these forces that are just kind of like swaying through our lives, and kind of just part of bigger things that we don't actually have so much control over. But yeah, creating, in work and in romantic partnership, I think there's always ways that you can set yourself up and set up opportunities to build.
Mm.
I guess what I'll add is this discernment between, I think, what you're talking about, which is interpersonal trust, like trusting someone else that you're in relationship or collaboration with, versus trusting yourself, versus spiritual trust, which is more like trust in a higher power or the guidance or direction in your life in some way. And I think what they all have in common is the sense of safety that allows your nervous system to relax and not be anxious. Like to me, it's like a really big sign that I don't trust someone if I feel anxious around them, or anxious that they're not going to do something they said they were going to do or committed to. And so trust to me is a state where I'm like, oh, I'm relaxed. I can rely on that person to show up in a certain way that we've agreed on. And I think what you're also talking about, Ariel, is like the kind of agreements that we make, and trust is broken when an agreement is violated in a certain way, right? And I love this metaphor that I think Brene Brown is the one where I first came across this, where she said trust is like a jar of marbles, which takes a really long time to build up over time with small acts, and each small act is a marble that goes in the jar. But one violation of an agreement or the relationship in any way can just tip over the whole jar of marbles, and it takes a long time to rebuild that. And I'll say in our work relationship, we actually ended up working with a mediator because we had developed such trust issues between all three of us, and between the two of us too. And through that, got introduced to nonviolent communication, which I know you're also a big fan of, and really started integrating that into our practice, making specific requests, having real dialogue about requests, and is that really something that I can honor or not? And if so, what's an alternative, and how can we be creative and co-create that together, so that we find an agreement that works for everyone and honors everyone's needs. So we've been really in that practice of naming our needs, making specific requests, and then creatively digesting and collaborating to create solutions. And I've been really awed by how, even in situations which seem very binary, that either it has to be your way or my way, or your needs seem to be in opposition with my needs, we always somehow seem to find a third way or some creative way that actually honors all the needs. It just wasn't the immediately obvious solution. And so trust building, I think, also takes creativity, and honesty, because I think a lot of trust gets broken in relationships when we really want to show up and meet the other person's needs, but actually we can't do that in an authentic way because we don't have capacity, or that whatever they're asking for actually isn't aligned for us or is in conflict with something that we need. And instead of voicing that, we say yes and then end up letting them down, which is a dynamic which definitely happened between us too. And so just that honesty. And for me, I had definitely had to work through a lot of patterns of people pleasing that I had my whole life, which I think is very common, a lot of thing that a lot of people are working on too, and realizing like, oh wait, it's actually better to have a more trusting relationship comes when we're all truly honest, and we know that, okay, if someone says that actually I can't do that, it's okay, we can work out a different solution. It's not the end of the world, and it's not going to cause the relationship to fall apart.
I love that you're both pointing to this importance of like deep self integrity, and there's like a self awareness that's needed to be able to voice your needs and edges and willingness or the absence of willingness. And I think that one of the biggest challenges in kind of our modern societal way of being is the pace at which everything moves. And there's this false sense of like, we need to plow through or leave parts behind in order to get this agenda executed on. And I'm using that language very intentionally as it's like really intense and harsh and it's painful. And I think one of the things that I'm so curious about is relationally, I know for me, sometimes I have the perception that in order to really move all the way through a process with the emotions and the needs and the requests and all the things that are involved, because sometimes we don't actually have that awareness or clarity to like check in with ourselves and slow down enough to know what's going on, that like there's this sense that, oh, this is taking a long time, like this is really slowing us down. And so I'm curious about how you meet the like relational aspect of things, like what it takes to actually get clear within oneself, work through the different the different possible solutions that might arise, but you can only really come up with those once you kind of understand the field of who's in the room and what we're navigating. And so, doing that as a couple, but then doing that as a triad, your team, and then doing that for organizations, like, I feel like the more people involved, the more complex it gets. And I'm wondering about this sense of like time and pressure and urgency, and how that, like, how you work with that skillfully, while, like, but without it becoming the focus. It's like, we need to do this, and I don't want to get sucked into the vortex of like we're just forever working out this thing and now nothing's happening. Like, how do you navigate that?
Yes, this is such a good question, and it comes up so much with the organizational clients that we work with. And it's really interesting because we work with a lot of tech teams because there's notorious conflict between the different roles on a software team. Product managers, engineers, and UX strategists, researchers, designers all have different training, all different backgrounds, all have different perspectives on how things should go. So we often get teams coming to us saying, we're missing rollout deadlines, we're not able to meet our roadmap because our teams are in conflict. And yet there's also this desire, but we can't spend time fixing it because that will take too much time. We have all these deadlines that we're not meeting. So what I always say is like that, yes, you may have to go slower at first. It will require a slowing down to understand what's actually going on, to get beneath the surface, because usually in a conflict situation, people are operating at the level of story. Like, he's like this, she's doing that, they're whatever the story is about the other person or the other team. And we need to get beneath the stories and become really curious about what's actually going on for the other people involved. And it really does take time to coach people through that process and to uncover what's really there. But once you do that, then it's all out in the open and you start to actually understand each other in a deeper way. And so, like, what I found from our own process is, yes, we had to have several really long mediation sessions with a coach that were time consuming. But now conflicts come up between the three of us and we resolve them so much quicker and more easily on our own. It doesn't require that whole lengthy process because we took the time up front to deal with all those underlying issues, bring them to the surface, and then learn the tools to work out similar things that come up on our own. So now we actually work through stuff so much quicker, and it's genuine trust, genuine alignment that actually allows us to collaborate and work towards goals in a really effective way without being dragged down by all this other stuff. And I just hear so many people talk to me about how much time and energy and sleep they waste on conflicts with their, yes, partner and family members, but with their work colleagues too. I'm sure everyone here has the experience of the friend who can't stop complaining about their boss or coworker or something like that. And I'm like, wow, like, if you're in a conflict, you're investing a lot of emotional and mental energy in the thing already. A few hours of your time to really get underneath the surface will then free up all that capacity. You don't have to spend hours of your life dwelling on it and feeling drained by it anymore because it's actually been resolved. So I think part of it is slow down and invest time up front to move faster later, but also that investment of time frees up so much more than that, because your effectiveness is not just about time spent on things, it's also about the energy you have and the energy that you bring to things.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful kind of overview of how we talk about that to organizations we work with, which makes sense. And I think on the interpersonal romantic relationship side, I think it also holds true. It holds true in the same way. And I think also, like, we and our company come I think hold a perspective that relationships, that the process of being in a relationship is part of the point of the relationship, because that's relationships are all opportunities for you to learn about yourself, about how to communicate better, about how to they're teaching you what your own boundaries are. They're teaching you about yourself. You know, that you learn so much in just being in relationship. Um, I remember a couple of years ago, I was dating a woman who was in the kink world, and her existence was very different than mine, and she brought in where she's at and what her kind of desires and boundaries were, and it asked me like, well, oh, okay, I actually have to figure out what my boundaries are now, because this is very different than the narrative that I was going with before. And it's part, and so like all relationships are that way to some extent, because everybody has a way that they communicate, a way that they define their boundaries. So I think from a spiritual perspective and from a human development perspective, it's relationships are that teacher, or they're all teachers. And I think Mallory, described the language that we use to talk to people in organizations, to how they can understand that.
Yeah, I love that perspective that, and I think we share that point of view for sure in terms of with Hum Hum, how we're talking about dating, where everything is really an opportunity to grow and to learn. And we get the question a lot, so I'm going to pose it to you both. Like, we get this question a lot around, like, how do you know when it's worth like actually continuing to stay and turn towards the difficulty? Because, and from what I've seen, of course, there's difficulty that expands us and helps us evolve into the people we want to be. And then there's difficulty that just like takes us out or takes us off path or is like wearing us down. And like so much of the discernment process is like knowing the difference. And so I'm curious within your relationship specifically, like how were you able to recognize that the difficulty that was arising was actually like, let's call it, sand on the oyster pearl, or something that you were like, I need to continue to turn towards this difficulty? What helped you to do that?
Mm.
Hmm.
This is such a good question. And I think it's one that each individual really has to answer for themselves. It's not something that there's 3 criteria, and if you check it off, it's time to leave the relationship. Like,
That'd be so great, though. That'd be so wonderful.
It's really,
Put it in the comments.
I know everyone wants 3 easy steps these days, but my experience is that it's just not that. And each relationship is different and follows its own cycle, its own energetic pattern, and based on what both people need to learn, or like all the people involved need to learn. And there's no way that someone on the outside can know that. And what I think would be great advice for someone asking this question is focus on cultivating your own inner knowing about other choices in your life. So even if it's something as simple as, what do I want to eat right now? Where do I want to go for dinner? How do I want to spend this evening? Cultivating an intentional practice of checking in with yourself, your body, your soul, your heart, your being on like, what's right for me right now. And I find that it's easier. I've been practicing this over time, mostly with intuitive eating. And actually, Alexandra, you introduced me to this practice, which I've been doing a lot with, is just hovering my hand over different foods or teas or choices and sensing into what feels right to my body in the moment. And I think that when you practice this in other realms of your life, you cultivate that muscle memory and that skill of knowing, oh yeah, what's the right choice for me right now? And it can be really hard and overwhelming if you don't have a practice like that of connecting with your own self. And mindfulness, which I know Hum Hum does a lot of teaching around, is great for that too. It can be really hard if you don't have a practice like that when faced with really big life decisions to then know what's right. So practice it in small ways so that when the big moments come, you know what that feels like for you, because it's different for everyone. And for in my situation with our business and also with our relationship, I had a deep knowing from early on that Ariel was the person who I wanted to spend my life with, and which made it very awkward to be business partners with him for the first year of our relationship. But I just had a deep spiritual understanding of it that honestly came to me in a vision. And I really trust that when other things like that have come to me in my life, it's always set me on the right path. And I know what that feels like. And so, because I had that, I really trusted that. And the beginning of our relationship was very difficult. We went through a lot of chaotic transitions. We were in the middle of starting a new business, receiving a lot of business, and also building a lot of systems and learning a lot of new things for the same time. We synchronously ended up moving in together 2 months into dating each other, which was not planned. It was because his roommate actually had to leave unexpectedly at short notice, and I happened to be looking for an apartment at the same time. And so I ended up moving in, and we had to navigate all the living together and our different styles around that. Plus, work wise, we have completely different working styles. Like, we couldn't be more opposite ends of the spectrum. So it was a lot of things all on top of each other. At the beginning of our relationship, it was very challenging. Probably one of the most challenging times in my life, just in terms of the amount of emotional stuff I had to reckon with all the time. And I really felt guided to stay in that process because of that knowing I had that came to me at a soul level. That's not something that I can really describe or explain well in words.
I think I would agree that there is a felt somatic component to it. I I didn't know that Mallory had a vision. I didn't know that Mallory was even attracted to me at all for a long time. She got complete poker face, and but it's interesting. But there was literally a gravitational pull towards one another, that was just like what we kind of refer to as like a body yes. And I didn't actually put it together intellectually. And even when I did find out that there was feelings, that she had feelings for me, even then I was like, it didn't compute. But I I I recognized that there was like a literal gravitational pull. Um, it's so funny when you were talking about like hovering your hand over food. I was like, you gotta hover over your lover. You gotta hover over your lover. Um, and I remember one time we were walking actually it was before we had tea, and you said that I have a crush on you. I noticed that when I was walking down the street with Mallory, like there's like a protective like sphere of energy that I would like bring her into that sphere, and I was like, just like looking at our surroundings to making sure she was safe. And I noticed that that's something I did with previous long-term partners, and I noticed that I was doing that with her, and so it felt like there was a somatic piece that was bringing it to was kind of drawing us together. Um, the other thing that I'll say, I don't know, it is a very big question, and I don't have the three criteria, but I will say that um, relationships are supposed to challenge us. They are supposed to push us in that way. I think that one thing that's helped us a lot is being at a really high level of commitment. And I think that if you're half in, half out, it makes it so much more difficult. If you're like if you're in it, you should be fully in it until you decide to not be. And I think that makes it a lot easier to be in to be in that process, that deliberative process. Like if you're like, well, I don't know, so I'm gonna like try to give it some. I'm gonna give it like 80%. Like I don't think that works. I think that like if you're gonna go for it, like no, it's gonna test you at like to your highest degree, to your capacity, and that you can move through that. and that eventually you'll know, like you'll know it's like, actually this at this point I think this is no longer serving each of our evolution or serving our a shared vision of the future, and then you can say, okay, let's figure out where to go from there. But I think
Mm.
part of our, like, a deep commitment really helped us move through the most difficult things that I was not able to move through in previous
Mm.
relationships.
That's
Actually, can I just jump in with one more
please.
thing? I think your answer revealed maybe one of the criteria to me, which is if you're both evolved,
Stay tuned, folks.
which is if you're no, jokes aside, I think one of the things that I also noticed was even though it was really challenging, we were evolving and making progress. And we
Mm.
were, if I look back 3 years later from where we were then, like it's night and day, the way that we relate to each other, the way that we communicate, the way that we deal with challenging things. Like we've grown so much together, we've evolved in a really short amount of time. So deeply. And even though it was really challenging, I felt that even in the hard moments, we were progressing or evolving in some way, even though we occasionally became stuck in the same loops that would show up again and again in different ways. We were able to resolve those loops quicker or move through them with more humor and lightness, or just it felt like things were shifting and changing. It didn't feel stagnant or that we were stuck in a pattern that couldn't change. And I think we're both people who are willing to change and to grow. And the other thing that I really appreciated about you was also your ability to take ownership of your contribution. I think that's one of the agreements and the values that we share is each of us looking at, okay, how did I make this situation, rather than being in a place of I'm just blaming the other person for whatever is arising. And that also was a really different kind of dynamic than I've ever been in a partnership that felt very evolutionary, where if when we were both coming to the table in that way, it allowed us um to yeah meet those challenges and like not be stuck in this blame cycle that I've been in the past and I know is quite common.
Yeah, I love what you're pointing to. There's so much here. There's so much richness. I think the self-responsibility piece and having two beings that are willing to stand fully in that. And this commitment piece, I think, is so interesting. And it's like, is that a chicken and egg? Like, did the commitment get born out of the deep rest in the knowing that, that there was a goodness here, that there was something here that was worth turning towards? Or is the commitment just part of the unique intelligence of your dynamic? Like, I'm always so curious about this. Like, there's two people and then there's the connection. And I see it as like connections call forth things from us. Like we are being potentiated in the connection in some way. And so I think that's one of the things I wanted to ask you both about is like, what do you notice is getting like potentiated within you as a result of being in this unique bond together? And what do you notice about in coming together, what you're able to um, offer, like offer out to the community, to the world, like to be of service? I know it's something both of you deeply value.
Hmm.
So the question is, what is being born from this committed container?
It's just even the unique way that your bond is, let's call it evolving you, waking you up,
Hmm.
working you.
Well, one thing that comes to mind is, so I'll I'll explain, I think, something that's unique to this relationship that I think is responsible for some of our dynamic and how it's evolved is that, and it's because of the dual dynamic of being business partners and and romantic partners. And in some sense, you could say we went on a much more difficult journey, right? But I also think that because we were committed to be business partners, there was a container outside of our container. And so, you know, to be transparent, I had been coming out of a pattern of relationships where I would get to a point in the relationship where I would start finding fault in the other person and then say, "Oh, it doesn't feel right. They're not the one," and I would push them away. And when I came into this relationship with Mallory, that was not an option. So you could say I almost had it a little easier because I couldn't actually fall back on my old pattern. It was like if you want to end this relationship, you have to take complete ownership of it because you're still going to be in a relationship with this person. You're still going to have to make it work or see your business potentially fall apart and or one of you leave the business and see it completely, go through that kind of transformation. So it was like there was what was potentiated was an opportunity to create taking radical ownership. And when I came to it in that way, we both came to it in that way, it completely transformed the way that I was in relationships with people, and allowed me to say how am always, basically what we always came back to was like, how am I creating this situation? Even if it was Mallory's fault, even if I could say, Mallory, like you did that and that was messed up. How did I create it? How did I create the conditions for it? Maybe I didn't actually state my needs clearly. Maybe I was, there's always some way that I'm contributing to it. So I think coming from that perspective, being in this type of container created the opportunity for that itself, that radical ownership. And I think that's a big part of the reason why we were able to do so much evolution. And Mallory said in a short amount of time, it was actually she's talking about 3 years. So that's long or short depending on how you're looking at it, but that's one of the things that I think is unique about our partnership, and one of the reasons why I said, like, when you're creating a container of commitment, like, create it fully until you're ready to, like, exit that container. Yeah.
I think for me, it's self-acceptance because I've never actually been in a relationship this committed in this way before. I actually was very resistant to the idea of monogamy and committed relationships, and I didn't want to get married. Of course, I end up with someone who also designs and facilitates wedding ceremonies. Ariel is amazing and actually does a lot of queer weddings and helping people reimagine that ceremony to make it truly aligned with their values. So he gave me a completely different perspective on weddings, but I grew up with no good examples of healthy relationships. I just saw my parents so miserable, always fighting, always angry and resentful at one another. Pretty much that was the model that I saw all around me and my friends' parents, my extended family. So what I grew up with was marriage makes you miserable, and I never want to have a committed relationship, and I'd rather just be independent and have many different lovers and not actually commit because that will just trap me in misery was really how I thought about it. And so I had so much armor around my heart for so long. And I realized in the course of our relationship that, a lot of that was actually self-protection to try and protect me from being hurt. And I actually never truly fully opened my heart to someone in the way that I have with you. And it's because there are parts of myself that I hadn't opened my heart to my own self. There are parts of me that were that I have been exiling and felt like, oh, well, if I really show this part, that person will reject me or I'll never belong. And I have been so nourished by the radical acceptance that you offer me. And I think that one of the testaments to that is how safe and playful and happy my inner child feels. And I know you always joke, Ariel, about how silly I can be when we're in private, or how like silly and ridiculous we are at home together. And I think that's, to me, one of the testaments of feeling safe and trust, is that I can play around and joke around in that way and feel that all these parts of me, even my really hurt inner child who is in a lot of pain, feels really held and seen. And like through you offering that to me, Ariel, I've been able to then offer that to myself, which and realize actually that that's not something that comes from another person. Another person can illuminate that experience for you or offer you a guidepost or a beacon, but ultimately, like, that kind of love and acceptance is something that you have to give yourself. And I'm really grateful that that's something that I've been able to open myself to with your support.
Yeah, I think, thank you for sharing that. And as you're talking, I feel like it's what you just said is kind of like a perfect, um, in my mind, illustration of like what most relationships are intended to, what relationships at their best are intended to do, which is provide that space for you to open up more parts of yourself little by little until you can start healing those core wounds. And honestly, like for me, I think it really does come back to that that like how are we relating to those core wounds? Like that's what comes up in relationships. And I think it's such a beautiful illustration of like that process of saying I can bring a little bit more of myself and I can bring a little bit more of myself, and creating a space where that feels safe, so that I myself can be in a new relationship. And you know that's something that I'm working on right now. It's like how do I be a better parent to myself, to the little child in me that has trouble trusting because of the things that they experienced with their parents and with their relationship to receiving love and whatnot. So I think that's a good illustration of that.
I love how for each of you in different ways, this relationship kind of created like the perfect storm of circumstances for you to keep turning towards and not run away. Like there were these just different things in place that like were like, okay. And it allowed this full on turning towards commitment and then like love to really blossom. And it's beautiful to hear each of you talk about it. So, Mallory, after hearing what you were just sharing, it really sparked this question around, the ways that we're each conditioned and what we inherit from. You talk about, you have a whole system for this. Maybe you can actually talk about it. All the different things we inherit that inform the narratives we do have, and how you are living into a way of relationship that looks different. You're writing a new narrative. So, if you can each just share a little bit about that, I would love your perspective.
Yeah, it's funny. I love that you incorporate this question into your interviews, because at Inheritance Project, sometimes we get asked, like, are you a tax firm? Do you do estate planning for wealthy individuals? And it's funny that, like, that in some circles, when you say inheritance, it's people only mean physical property or money that gets passed down from one generation to the next. Of course, you and anyone else who's on a spiritual path knows that we inherit so much more from our upbringing and from our ancestors, like the imprints and the conditioning and the way that we were taught to see the world and one another. And so a big part of all the programs that we do at Inheritance Project is bringing more awareness to all of those things and how they often operate on the subconscious level. And I'll give one example from my own life, because there's so much, but I think that I subconsciously inherited the idea that commitment is equal to restriction. And part of that, I think, comes from my female line of Chinese ancestors, where in that traditional culture, as a woman, when you get married, you fully cut ties with your own family and you enter into and become part of your husband's family. And so when you make that commitment, you're giving up yourself, your independence, and you're there to serve and create a heir to your husband's family. So I know this was the case also in many traditional patriarchal cultures all over the world. So subconsciously, and also seeing my parents' dynamic, I had this idea that to be in a committed heterosexual relationship means to give up my freedom, to give up my independence, and to be restricted and not be able to express my soul's purpose or my true desires in life. And so for me, it's really interesting. I almost had a roundabout different journey than what a lot of people have, because I rejected the traditional model that's often held up in our society as the norm, or what you should do. And I know a lot of people have amazing, empowering experiences finding their truth as not that. Ironically, I had to find that my truth in some ways was that. And here I am in this really committed, lifelong, heterosexual, monogamous partnership that I'm so happy in, that like me 5 years ago would be like, what are you doing? And so for me, it's that reckoning of like, what is my true desire and what's really right for me, regardless of what society says or what I was told. And I had to acknowledge that a lot of my ideas about relationships were coming from this place of rebelling against or rejecting what I grew up with and what I saw around me, what I inherited. And in that process, I also rejected some of my actual true desires. And so, yeah, it's been a process to acknowledge like what's really true for me, not some identity of myself that my ego had created that would be a cooler version of me or something. And really embrace this relationship and the commitment that I really desire and that feels true in our relationship.
I really love that the way you're talking about this, it's less about what it actually looks like so long as it's chosen and it's something that you come to versus a reaction against what you'd been conditioned or reaction to what you had inherited. Like you're finding your own way in relationship, you're creating your own way in relationship. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, in a way, choosing something just because it's rebelling against the norm is kind of the same thing as choosing the norm in a different way. What about you?
Well, I think that, for me, I think I had a narrative that when I found the one, that I would fall so deeply in love and it would be like fireworks, and there's this passion that will burn and take us into like this happily ever after. And it feels like our partnership literally was the complete opposite. Like and eventually, you say like, oh, and eventually like we'll decide to commit and decide to get married, and kind of goes along this like upward progression. And for us, it was the complete opposite. It was a situation where when we had our first conversations about should we even approach this, we talked about what we want our lives to look like. We checked in about having children. Like we did all the difficult, like very like logistical conversations like up front. It was like all that was up front. We also had so much interference in our chemistry and our level of comfortability with each other, and all of that stuff that's the stuff that developed over time, and became part of an intentional practice of opening up to each other emotionally. And so I think it was it was just a very different completely different script that that I thought that I was, assumed I would move through. And I think it continues to be in all kinds of different ways. I mean, at one point, Mallory was, we were talking about having children, and she was saying, well, maybe we can have children and we get married later. Like, that's just something I never thought about. But I was like, okay, I'm open to that. And at one point, Mallory was saying, well, what if I take, what if I like come into like a big corporate job? Would you stay at home with the children? Would you stay at home? And I'm like, well, I never thought that I would do that, but I did do preschool teaching for, many years. I'm just like the most qualified stay-at-home dad. And so like we just talk about these things as being part of what we want to create, part of what we want to write. And does it make sense for us? Does it contribute to a creative and beautiful future, as opposed to like, you know, how it's supposed to be laid out according to society's guidelines. So I think in all kinds of ways, I find that we continue to just be intentional about writing our own narrative, and like Mallory said, like for people in our community, like being in a monogamous relationship is kind of like also a different narrative. Like now everybody's exploring, all kinds of different iterations of relationship, and this one was not one that was the one we chose because uh, it was normal. It's because this is the one we wrote. This is the one that we found actually worked for us and created a container that we could grow so much in. So yeah, so those
Yeah.
some things come to mind.
Yeah, I think that you're so right in pointing that out. Like, we didn't just default to this, even though what we have in some ways is kind of like the standard social relationship of what's presented as normal in our society. And like, we were very intentional about the whole process and considered all the different options for so many different aspects of our life and relationship, and ultimately came to what was true for us. And just being in that process has been so enriching and
Hmm.
illuminated so much. And again, it was forced because of the nature of our relationship. We were like, well, you can't really just casually date your business partner and then 6 months down the line figure out, actually, we're not aligned on all these major things. Let's not move forward. We were like, well, we better find this all out now. And I realized, wow, what if I had been dating people in this way before? It would have created so much more depth, and also probably saved me a lot of time on people who weren't really aligned with my real vision for my life. And so, yeah, a lot of things happened for us because of the nature of our relationship that I probably wouldn't have done in that way if it wasn't for that. But in hindsight, I think that there's such great relationship practices that anyone could embrace, even if you're not in this very unique type of relationship.
Oh, I want to ask you about all those. And I'm like, okay, we're coming up on our time. So maybe we'll do a separate blog or something like this, putting it in my mind. But before we wrap up, if you can just share a couple of words about the upcoming conflict course that you will be teaching. And I'm going to put in the YouTube notes all the ways people can get in touch with you. So if you want to shout out anything in particular, I know you have a course coming up and yeah, you can tell us all the things.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited to share about Bridge Builders, which is a conflict resolution and inclusive leadership course that Inheritance Project is offering. We developed this course through our work working with organizations and seeing what people really needed in their workplaces, and realizing this was a really uh, underappreciated and known skill set of how to actually resolve interpersonal issues that come up at work. And a lot of the skills and tools that we share were synthesized from our own experience going through a lot of conflict, as a couple, but also as a founding team of three, and also pulls a lot on our various studies of healing and the nervous system, and focuses a lot on how to work with what's coming up for you somatically, and also in terms of your narratives about a different situation. So we have a process called the 7 skills for challenging conversations, which is the foundation of this program. And the idea is really to become the kind of leader who always reaches out and extends a hand and builds a bridge and looks at how can I find a creative solution that works for everyone here, rather than being entrenched in the kind of conflict resolution that's often taught in business schools and such, which is how do I win at all costs, and maybe trick the other person to think they're winning too. So we talk about moving beyond win-win into creating really real collaboration that's based on honoring the needs of everyone involved. So it's a leadership program, communication skills course, self-development program. Ariel was joking earlier that it's like a course on relationships that you can get your boss to pay for, because we do take a lot of groups from companies and teams who want to join together, which is amazing. And we have group discounts for that. And one of the pieces of feedback that we get a lot is, I joined this course to be a better leader at work, but it ended up saving my marriage, because the skills of being in relationship are universal regardless of the nature of the relationship, whether it's a work relationship or a personal relationship. A lot of the same skills and tools and orientation applies. So the course starts at the end of March. It's virtual, it's 7 weeks long. It gives you a chance to really self-reflect and practice the skills in community and get live coaching on it. It's a really enriching program. I wish I had something like this years ago in my life and career, and didn't have to go through all the years of struggle and challenge that we did to synthesize and create it. So it's really an offering of service, because I believe that to solve the biggest issues that the world is facing, we need to learn relational skills that will help us collaborate in new ways that really honors everyone's unique needs. And I'm really always awed by the community of people who show up and participate in the work they're doing in the world. So if that interests you, we're going to give a special discount code to the Hum Hum community as well. And is there anything else you want to add about it?
Just that I participated I was a participant in the last cohort that we did. We created it obviously, but we also wanted to go through it ourselves. And I was really blown away, taking some of my own medicine, and was able to really put into practice some skills in my family relationships that change those relationships and change patterns in those relationships that had been going on for years. One in particular with my mother, and was going through a challenge with her, and Mallory was like, well, did you lead with curiosity? Did you actually did you ask her what's going on for her in the situation? And I was like, okay, yeah, no, I didn't. And actually applied the skills to my relationship with my mother, and saw a completely different result, completely different side of her came out, and sent us in a different direction at a really pivotal moment that could have actually caused caused a rift in our relationship that may have lingered, as she moves into the last chapter of her life, as opposed to actually bringing us closer together. So it's called Bridge Builders, because it's really about how do we create bridges and use conflicts and tension points as an opportunity to strengthen relationships and bring us closer with others. So that's just from my own experience. It's been really, really special. And again, the people who self-select to be in this group are just brings so much wisdom. I learned so much just being with other people and other leaders in this room. So yeah, so if you're interested, please reach out. We'd love to invite the home community to join us on that journey.
Yes, and I can personally vouch for both of you as curriculum creators as well as facilitators and leaders. And it's such a joy to get to both like collaborate with you, be connected with you, learn from you. Thank you for coming on with us today, and I'll put all of your contact information in the show notes. And so grateful for what you're creating in the world, for who you are, and yeah, thanks for coming on.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so much,
Alexandra.
Alexandra. The feeling is so mutual, and so appreciate your thoughtfulness and intention with this series and in the way that you guide these conversations.
Yeah, so nourishing. So great to be with you like in this way.
Thank you.